He had $1.5 million in his investment account. I know that because he showed me the statement printed out, folded twice, tucked into the front pocket of his jacket like it was a doctor's note. He was 62. He just retired the month before, and he was losing sleep over 4 tires. Not a car, not a roof. 4 tires, $800. He sat there and told me he'd been lying awake at night, running the numbers in his head, wondering if he could justify it. I kept thinking, what if the market drops next week? What if I need that $800 for something more important? He laughed a little when he said it. The kind of laugh that means, I know this sounds crazy, but I also can't stop. That's usually not a money problem. It's what decades of saving does to your wiring. He wasn't being irrational. He'd spent the last 40 years training himself not to spend. Every paycheck meant add. Every dollar spent felt like a small loss. That was the program, and it worked. It worked really well, actually. Then the W-2 income stops. And that's where most retirement plans stop helping. The account balance doesn't change. The feeling does. When money stops coming in on a schedule, the brain starts reading every expense as a threat. Not a decision. A threat. I've watched this happen more times than I can count. People who were perfectly reasonable spenders during their working years suddenly paralyzed over a $200 grocery run. Not because they're broke. Because the system that told them it's okay to spend the paycheck is gone. I used to tell people, squeeze every last dollar into savings until your final day of work. Build the biggest nest egg possible. Don't touch it until you have to. I was wrong about that. Completely wrong. Because what I didn't understand then, what I've since seen play out in real people's real lives, is that the habit of not spending doesn't automatically switch off when you retire. If anything, it hardens. The saver's guilt you ignored for 40 years doesn't disappear when you have more time. It gets louder. So here's the only workaround I've found that actually works. There are 5 categories of purchases that you need to make before you retire, while you still have a paycheck coming in. Not because they're luxuries, because your brain will let you buy them now in a way it simply won't later. This isn't about spending more. It's about spending at the right time, using the right income stream, so that the first decade of your retirement isn't spent second-guessing every dollar while your body, your house, and your life wait on hold. If you want to build a retirement that actually feels usable, stick around. Subscribe to Wes Investor if you haven't already. This is exactly the kind of thing we work through here. Let's get into it. The first purchase isn't a thing. It's your body. And I know that sounds obvious, but I've been close to enough people heading into retirement to know that taking care of your health before you stop working usually means scheduling a physical and calling it a day. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the expensive stuff. The stuff you've been putting off. The dental work, the eyes, the hearing, the knee that's been making that sound since 2019. What catches people off guard is this. Basic Medicare, Part A and B, does not cover dental, vision, or hearing at all. This isn't a small coverage issue. Medicare just doesn't handle these categories the way people assume. And if you wait until after you retire to fix a tooth, get fitted for hearing aids, or update your prescription, you're paying 100% out of pocket from a fixed income with no employer cushion underneath you. Let me give you a number that makes this concrete. A single dental implant or bridge in 2026 runs between $3,000 and $5,000. If you're still on your employer-sponsored health plan when you get it done, your out-of-pocket cost after copay is typically around 20%. So maybe $600 to $1,000. Wait until you're on Medicare. That same procedure costs you the full amount. Every dollar. That's not a small difference. That's the cost of 4 or 5 months of groceries. I've seen people do this without realizing what they were trading away. Vincent had a solid retirement portfolio. He wasn't hurting for money. But he kept delaying the dental work. There was always something else. A trip to schedule, a grandkid's birthday, a quarter where the market looked shaky. And then the window closed. He spent the first 5 years of his retirement unable to eat a steak, unable to bite into an apple, managing the pain with a rotation of soft foods and ibuprofen. He had all the time in the world. He just couldn't enjoy any of it. That's the health time paradox, and it's more common than people admit. And this is where people get stuck. You spend your working years telling yourself you'll deal with your health when you have more time. Then you retire and suddenly you have the time, but either the money is harder to justify spending, or the condition has progressed, or both. You made room for retirement, but left the health issues waiting at the door. I remember sitting across from someone who kept squinting at the grocery receipt under the fluorescent lights. She'd been meaning to update her glasses for 2 years, kept pushing it back. Not because the copay was too high. It wasn't. Because spending money on herself felt like jumping a line she wasn't supposed to jump yet. Retirement was the reward. This was still the waiting period. That's the saver's guilt talking. And it has real physical consequences. What this really comes down to is timing. You can walk into retirement with a body that's been taken care of, or you can walk in with a balance sheet that looks a little better and a body that starts handing you bills the moment the paycheck stops. One is a bill you deal with once. The other keeps showing up later when spending already feels harder. Use the employer coverage while you have it. Book the appointments. Do the dental work in stages if you need to, but start before your last day. Your Medicare card will not rescue you on this one. Start with your health, because retirement only works if your body can come with you. And speaking of where you're going to live, let's talk about your house and the game the banks have quietly been running on retirees for decades. Banks love a W-2, not you, not your net worth, not the $400,000 in equity you've built over 25 years. They love the W-2 that's steady, predictable. Employer-verified income hitting your account every 2 weeks like clockwork. It's the thing that makes their underwriting software happy. And the day you stop having one, underwriting gets a lot less friendly. I've watched this catch people completely off guard. A couple, both mid-60s, kids grown, grandkids a few states away, decided they were finally ready to downsize. Sell the 5-bedroom house, buy something smaller, closer to family. Reasonable plan. They had cash. They had retirement accounts. They had more assets than most people see in a lifetime. What they didn't have as of 1 week after retirement was a W-2. The bank sat on their file for 8 months. Requested documentation after documentation. Proof of income. Proof of distributions. Letters from their financial advisor. Tax returns going back 3 years. The loan officer kept apologizing, saying it was just the process. And that's the part retirees don't expect. Having assets doesn't mean the process gets easier. Meanwhile, the house they wanted sold to someone else. Twice, they weren't broke. They were just retired. And to the bank, those two things looked almost identical on paper. So if you're planning to downsize, refinance, pull a home equity line, or make any significant mortgage move, do it before you submit your resignation. Not the month before. Before. Give yourself enough runway that the process can close while your last few pay stubs are still recent and verifiable. But maybe you're not moving. Maybe you're staying put. That's fine. There's still a move worth knowing about, and most people heading into retirement have never heard of it. It's called a recast mortgage, and it's different from a refinance. Most people near retirement haven't even heard the option mentioned. Say you're carrying $150,000 left on your mortgage at a 3% interest rate, a rate you locked in a few years back when rates were still reasonable. You don't want to refinance, because refinancing in 2026 means trading your 3% for something closer to 6.5%. That's moving backward. A recast lets you keep the rate. You make a large lump sum payment directly against the principal, say $50,000, and the bank recalculates your monthly payment based on the new, lower balance. Same 3% rate. Same loan term. But your monthly payment drops from around $1,200 down to roughly $600. The point isn't the exact payment. The point is you lower what your life costs every month without giving up the old rate. You just lowered the amount your life costs every month by about $600. That's not about earning more. It's about needing less each month, permanently. For a retiree living on a fixed income, that's the difference between feeling financially comfortable and feeling like you're always one bad month away from dipping into principal. Not every lender offers a recast, and most charge a small administrative fee, usually $200 to $500. But compared to the cost of refinancing, it's almost nothing. Now, while you're still working, this is also the time to deal with the house itself, the roof that's got maybe 5 years left. The HVAC system that's been running on borrowed time since the second Obama administration. The grab bars in the bathroom you keep meaning to install. The deck boards that flex a little too much when you walk on them. I know it feels counterintuitive to spend money on the house right before you leave for retirement. But think about what you're actually doing when you delay. You're leaving a maintenance bill sitting inside your biggest asset. And that bill doesn't care what the market is doing when it comes due. A roof doesn't wait for a good quarter. A heating system doesn't fail on a schedule that's convenient for your withdrawal strategy. And ask yourself, do you want to discover that in year 3 of retirement or handle it while income is still coming in? Deferring that $15,000 roof repair until year 3 of retirement mean funding it entirely from retirement accounts that were supposed to generate income, not absorb emergency expenses. And if you're drawing from a traditional 401k, every dollar you pull out is taxable income. A $15,000 repair becomes a $15,000 withdrawal plus whatever tax bracket it pushes you into. What this really comes down to is timing. Spending on your house now, while you have earned income to absorb it, costs less in real terms than spending the same amount later from a tax-deferred account during retirement. Fix the roof while you're still on the payroll. Recast the mortgage if the math works. And get the lending done before you turn in your badge. You've handled the biggest line item. Now, let's deal with the one sitting in your garage. There's a version of retirement that most people don't talk about because it sounds too small to matter. It's the version where you're lying awake at 2 a.m., not because the market crashed, not because of a health scare, but because the check engine light came on again, and you're trying to calculate whether the repair is worth it on a car you don't fully trust anymore. And you're doing this math in the dark from a fixed income with no paycheck coming in Friday to make it feel more manageable. On the surface, it looks like a car issue. Really, it's the monthly cost that keeps following you. What makes this hit harder in retirement is pretty simple. In retirement, every dollar you spend comes from one of two places: income your money generates or principal you're drawing down. There's no third option, which means every recurring monthly obligation, every fixed cost you carry into retirement is a permanent claim on one of those two sources. That's why a car payment feels different at 67 than it did at 47. Car payments are especially punishing because they combine a fixed monthly drain with the ongoing uncertainty of an aging vehicle underneath you. The average car payment in 2026 sits around $700 to $750 a month for a new vehicle. Add insurance, registration, and routine maintenance, and you're looking at $900 to $1,000 a month just to keep one car operational. For a household on a fixed retirement income, that's not background noise. That's a bill that shapes every other decision. The move, and it's not complicated, is to buy a reliable car 3 to 5 years before you retire and pay it off completely before your last day of work. Not a luxury vehicle. Not the car you always wanted. A Honda. A Toyota. Something with a long reliability track record and a dealer network that exists in most zip codes. Buy it, finance it on a short term if you need to, and use the peak earning years of your career to eliminate the payment as fast as possible. I did this myself. I bought a plain, ordinary car. Nothing impressive. And I structured the payoff so that the month I received my last paycheck was the same month I wrote the final check on the loan. Walking into retirement without owing anyone a car payment, it's a small thing on paper. In practice, it changes how the whole thing feels. Because what you've actually built when you do this right is simple. You have a vehicle with 10 to 15 years of useful life still ahead of it. It carries a manufacturer's warranty or an extended warranty that protects you from the expensive surprises. And it costs you nothing monthly except insurance and upkeep. Costs you can predict, plan for, and absorb without touching principal. Now connect this back to what we covered in the last section. If you recast your mortgage and cut your monthly housing payment by $600 and you eliminate your car payment of $500 to $700, you've just reduced your fixed monthly obligations by somewhere between $1,000 and $1,500 without changing your lifestyle in any meaningful way, without downsizing your life. Just by timing 2 purchases correctly relative to your retirement date. That's bigger than budgeting. You're lowering what your life costs every month. The compounding effect of a lower monthly floor is something most retirement calculators undersell. If your baseline expenses are $1,200 a month lower, your portfolio doesn't just last longer, it supports the same lifestyle with less pressure. And even if you never run the exact calculator, you feel this immediately in retirement. And there's a psychological layer here that matters just as much as the math. Fixed costs mess with retirement confidence because they don't flex. When you have a car payment, you owe it whether the market is up or down, whether you're healthy or recovering from surgery, whether you feel like spending that month or not. It's a commitment made in the past that pulls money out of the present every single month, with no room for negotiation. Eliminating that commitment before it follows you into retirement is one of the cleanest financial moves you can make. It doesn't require a spreadsheet. It just requires doing it while you still have the income to absorb it. Get the car handled. Pay it off before you walk out the door. Because that car is going to take you somewhere. And the next question is whether you'll actually let yourself go. Here's something I've noticed about bucket list trips. People talk about them for years. Italy, Portugal, a national park road trip, a cruise through Alaska. The conversation happens at the dinner table, at birthday parties, at the tail end of a long weekend when everyone's feeling a little nostalgic and generous with their plans. And then nothing happens. The summer passes. Then another one, and the trip stays exactly where it's always been, somewhere in the future, waiting for the right moment. I know a couple who talked about Italy for 3 years. Every spring it was maybe this fall. Every fall it was definitely next summer. They had the money. They had the health. What they didn't have was a mechanism that forced the decision out of the comfortable space of someday. Then one of them quietly booked it. Flights, hotels, a cooking class outside Florence, all of it non-refundable. On a credit card they paid off the same week. The other one was furious for about 4 days. Once it was booked and paid for, the decision was done, and that was exactly why it finally happened. That trip became the one they talk about most. Not because it was perfect, but because it happened. Because the decision got made before one of them had a bad year health-wise. Before someday ran out of runway. Once the money was spent, there was nothing left to debate. This is where the saver's guilt hits hardest, by the way. not on tires, not on dental work, on experiences, because experiences feel optional in a way that a broken tooth doesn't. Your brain can always construct a reason why the trip should wait: market conditions, family schedules, a vague sense that it's not quite time yet. But if you pay for it now, while you're still earning, the decision is already made. Your W-2 income absorbed the cost. Your retirement account stays untouched. And you're not asking your retired self to approve a big emotional spend later. And this isn't only emotional timing. In 2026, the tax side got less forgiving too. At the end of 2025, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions expired, which means the income tax brackets in 2026 have reverted to their pre-2018 structure. Higher rates across most brackets than what people spent the last several years planning around. If your retirement strategy involved pulling a large chunk from your traditional 401k to fund a big trip, you need to run those numbers again. A $30,000 withdrawal to cover a 2-week international trip can end up costing well above the sticker price once the withdrawal hits your tax return. I'm not a fortune teller about what Congress does next. Nobody is. But I understand enough about how this works to say using your W-2 income or cash you've already set aside in an after-tax account to prepay for experiences is almost always more tax efficient than pulling from a pre-tax retirement account during your first years of retirement, when your tax situation is still unsettled. Pay for the experience with the paycheck. Let the 401k keep compounding. And do it before you retire, not after. Because after, every dollar you spend on a plane ticket comes with a quiet voice asking whether you should have kept it. That voice is very hard to reason with. The easiest way to deal with it is to make the decision before it shows up. Money can be earned again. But a summer when travel still feels easy on your body does not stay open forever. Book the trip. Pay for it now. Do it while you still have a paycheck that makes the decision feel real. Retirement planning isn't only about the numbers on a spreadsheet. Let's talk about what it actually looks like when you get it right. You spent 40 years becoming an excellent saver. That's not a small thing. Most people never get there. You delayed gratification when it was hard. You contributed when the market looked terrifying. You said no to things so that future you would have options. That took discipline, and it worked. You won that game. The problem is that the game changed, and nobody sent you a memo. The skills that built the account are not the same skills that let you live from it. Accumulation and distribution run on completely different psychology. And if you carry the accumulation mindset into retirement without adjusting, you end up with good numbers on paper, but a retirement that feels tighter than expected. I've seen it. Someone with $2 million in their accounts, sleeping on a mattress they've had since 2008 because they can't bring themselves to spend $1,500 on a new one. Not because they can't afford it, because the habit of not spending is so deeply wired that even obvious, reasonable purchases feel like a betrayal of something. At that point, it isn't discipline helping you anymore. It's just an old habit still driving. The 5 things we've talked about, your health, your home, your mortgage structure, your car, your experiences, these may not feel urgent, but they shape whether retirement actually works day to day. When you fix the dental work while you still have employer coverage, you're not splurging. You're removing a future liability before it becomes a problem. When you recast the mortgage or downsize before you retire, you're lowering the floor of what your life costs every month, permanently. When you pay off the car, you're eliminating a fixed obligation that would otherwise follow you into every year of your retirement. When you book the trip, you're making a decision that your retired self will be too cautious to make alone. Each one lowers the odds that retirement feels fragile when real life shows up. There are 2 versions of retirement that I've watched play out, and the difference between them isn't the account balance. It's the setup. The fragile version is the person who optimized everything right up until the last day of work, and then stepped into retirement with a strong balance sheet and a life full of decisions still waiting to be made. The house needs work. The car is aging. The body has been waiting. The trips are still theoretical, and every expense from day one feels like erosion. The resilient version is the person who used the last few working years to set things up in a way that's easier to live with. Lower fixed costs, a body that's been maintained, a home that's ready, experiences already locked in. They step into retirement with less to manage, which makes it easier to actually relax. You've already done the hardest part. You saved. You showed up for 40 years. Now give yourself permission to finish the transition well. If you saw yourself somewhere in this video, share it with your partner. This is the kind of conversation that's easier to start with something to point at. Thanks for watching Was Investor. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll keep working through this together. See you next time.